Good afternoon, Kristen. Welcome. Good afternoon, Grace. Welcome. And here comes all of our friends. While folks are joining, feel free to go up into the upper right corner of your Zoom square with the 3 dots, and you can pull down and rename to include your institution affiliation with your name if you so choose. It's not a requirement, but it's just kind of fun to see where folks are around the state. Welcome, Amy. Welcome, Julie. Okay, I have 12:31, so let's go ahead and get started. And we understand that some folks may be joining us. So welcome everyone to today's Leap Indiana 4th Monday Coffee Hour. So for our session for today, we are privileged to have Dr. Dennis Buckmaster with us today. He is a professor from Purdue University, Department of Agriculture and Biological Engineering. So he's going to talk to us and share some information about cognitive load and how we manage that and learn more about those details. So without further ado, welcome. Just a reminder, we are recording this session for uploading to our Leap Indiana website. So this is being recorded. Without further ado, thank you, Dennis, for sharing with us today. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Let me get things set up here. Here we go. Hopefully you can see that well. And if anybody chats, Molly knows to interrupt me and pause me where we are. So I don't want to take hardly any time to introduce myself, except you're probably wondering what in the world is an engineer doing talking about managing cognitive load. Well, I am not the theorist on this. I am a drink the Kool-Aid kind of a guy. Like I learned of it in a book and I found it to resonate very much with me. And since then I've been trying to pass that along to others. What doesn't show there is for a few years, I also served as an assistant dean in our academic programs office. And in that role, it was largely to facilitate the teaching by other faculty and the advising by other advisors. And so that is part of what I used to do, but it isn't part of day to day for me at the moment anyway. So managing cognitive load, if we were in person, I'd ask how many of you knew what in the world that is, but we'll just move on. So that you can manage your cognitive load well, I will be quiet so that you can read that simple slide. And then I just want to emphasize the part about enhanced learning effectiveness and efficiency for students. That's really the goal with some understanding of this topic here. So here is it defined, and I'll just let you speed read that also. It's about efficient methods to design instructional environments, to deliver instructional content, because we all have, no matter how smart we think we have a limited capacity of working memory. And of course, when we're teaching students, we have to remember that the reason they're in our course is with regard to the content of that course, they are novices. And we want to get them to be beyond novices. So it's important. So this is my outline. I'll give you a couple of very good references, and I'm glad that it's being recorded so that you can always go back and find it again. I'll do a little bit of vocabulary introduction. I'll present and discuss some of these effects with some examples. I'll try to connect it a little bit to motivation, that is learner control. I will at the end allow very easy questions, and then we should have good time for sharing and discussion along the way as well. So this is one slide. I'm just going to pause it there at least long enough for you to grab a screen capture or just take a photo of it if you want. And if we need to come back to it at the end, we can. But the book pictured at the top, and it's the first one in the list, is the book that I first read on this topic. And I found it to be a fabulous read. Of course, now it's old. It's 16 years old, but still very relevant and a very easy, practical read for any of us who teach anything. So those are a couple other references just for your reference. Okay, so some of this cognitive load theory, mumbo jumbo, some of you are going to say, well, that's obvious. I knew that. Some of it you're going to say, I don't believe it. That's counter my intuition. Some of you, and in my case, it was this. It struck a chord. Oh, that's why when I taught in this way, it was effective. So hopefully some of it will reinforce the way you do things, like I'll just keep doing that. And then one of my goals in presenting in a venue like this is, well, maybe I can lead you to experiment. Try something slightly different and see how it works. So that's sort of the goal there. So I will comment, and again, I'm an agricultural engineer, probably the only one on the call. So we teach very different things, but this cognitive load theory, it's universal. It applies whether I'm trying to teach my grandkids or back in the day when I had my own kids at home, teaching them things, or college students or graduate students, doesn't matter. There are general principles and good guidelines. It is evidence-based. It does lead to efficient learning, and it leverages the way that our brains work. All right, so just a little bit of vocabulary, very little bit. Working memory is that part of your memory that you're putting to use right in the moment. It is what I'm using to process what I just heard, what I just read, what I'm just now looking at. I'm using my working memory. And as Sweller explains in the video that comes along with the book, and is also in all the readings, working memory is limited in capacity and in duration. And so we're trying to leverage that limited capacity and duration. Long-term memory is where you store things that you've seen before, you've processed it before, and now it is stored in your mind in the form of schema, and it provides essentially the basis for expertise. You don't need to use working memory to reprocess things that you've already learned in your long-term memory. And then schema, a little bit like scaffolding, it's the structure in your mind that your long-term memory is stored. It allows you to chunk a whole bunch of things into a simpler thing. So we call them mental models or schema or scaffolding. And when we just pause on that screen just for a moment to think, what is the purpose of my teaching? It is to help my students develop the appropriate schema for whatever the topic and the subject matter is. I want them to have these things stored in their long-term memory in a logical structure so that they can recall it quickly and appropriately, that sort of a thing. So we're leveraging working memory to build long-term memory, and we do it, we're trying to do it in an exemplary way so that they can have a good schema. Okay, so here is an example, and I wish I could see all of your faces at the same time while I'm doing this. That is a hydraulic schematic, and I'm sort of guessing based on some of the institutions that I saw there at the beginning that you probably have not read a hydraulic schematic before. Well, I have a schema in my head for how electrical and hydraulic and architectural schematics should look. And so for me, this is a very easy and rapid read. For students that I teach, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch. So let me give you just one little hint of it. Let's just look at that highlighted element there. Hopefully you would agree that sort of looks like a ball in a funnel. And so if the fluid, whether it be air, or hydraulic oil, or water, came up from the bottom, it would push the ball out of the way and the water could go through it from bottom to top. But if the fluid tried to come from the top to the bottom, it would essentially push that ball into the funnel and seal it tighter and tighter. So that's called a check valve. It allows flow in one direction, but not the other direction. So now that I've explained that one, you can, if you saw one that was similar to it, you would have a schema for understanding, oh, a line is where fluid flows, and the diagram of the schematic is supposed to in some way explain what that symbol does. Well, just so you don't get totally lost here, that dashed line with a number 9 on it is what we call a pilot line. So it would never have flowing fluid through it, but it would have fluid in it that might be pressurized. And what that one does, if it's pressurized on the pilot, it would lift the ball out of the funnel and allow the oil to go from top to bottom. So it's a pilot operated check valve. That's more hydraulics than we came for today. But I wanted to use that one as an example of there is such a thing as a schema. And once you have a schema for reading schematics like this, well, you could read many, many more. All right, so managing cognitive load, the books that I've read and the articles talk about these things called effects. And so I'm going to just go through a few of those quickly today. First one is the split attention effect. As you can see there, it's when my attention is supposed to be here, but it sort of has to be over there at the same time, then I'm imposing extraneous cognitive load on the reader, or I've imposed it on myself. So some examples, and we can all relate to this, I think. If you have a textbook or a journal article, and there is text and then there's figures, you know, the older we get, the more experienced we are, we have a knack for reading a sentence or two of text, jumping over to the figure to see what did they just explain there. Then you go back to the text and you go back to the figure. That is split attention. Like, where are my eyes supposed to be? On the figure or on the text? And in this case, both actually, but that's split attention. How many of us have used software tutorials to learn how to use particular software, like a printed manual, but then you're looking at the printed manual, then you go to your keyboard and the screen and you sort, oh, what was that command over there in the manual? You're like literally bouncing your head back and forth from one place to the other. That's split attention. You can also have the split attention effect if students are taking notes during lectures. Like they're splitting their attention between the board, the screen, whatever it is the instructor is holding in their hand and demonstrating, and their notepad writing notes. It's not like taking notes is bad, but they're splitting their attention between two places. And so that is a hamper on managing their cognitive load. So these are the fixes to the split attention effect. Use cues and signals. When the content is complex, like bring them in, focus their attention, let them not be wandering around about which part of this is important, which part isn't important, provide the cues. If you're going to be using text and graphics, get it on the same page, put it on the same screen, make it handy to jump from one to the other. This providing content summaries, and then the last one, computer manuals, in my opinion, should be burned. Just show how to do it on the screen itself. And so you're looking at the screen and you should do it while you're looking at the screen. Maybe even if it has to be a split screen, but at least keep the computer instruction on a computer rather than printed in a document. So here is an example. Which of these is a quicker read? It's like the eye doctor, left or right, A or B? I'm hoping you would agree that the one on the right is a little easier because you don't have to work, you don't have to memorize the legend. Oh, a gold diamond is 77 and a blue square is 52. Then you'd start looking at the chart. Oh, which one was 52? Which one was 77? No, you just label it right on the chart itself. Get rid of the legend. Therefore, the reader is not managing a legend and the chart. They're just actually looking at the chart. So this is an example of helping a reader manage their cognitive load. All right, so take just a moment. And if someone is really quick on the draw here, you can give an example. When were you experiencing split attention? So take time for one or two responses there. Just feel free to unmute and chime in. One example of a time where you had split attention. Be bold. Don't make me call on you. You are just like students, aren't you? Anyone?
So this is Frank. This is Frank. In teaching online, I often wonder about this because we provide narrative style text in addition to pre-recorded instructional explanation videos. And so I wonder, to what extent do students try to start the video, then try to read the text that we provide at the same time? So I wonder if we wouldn't be better off just having an explanation or introductory video on one page and then having the student complete that and then navigate away so they can read an outline or something that's text driven as a completely separate hyperlinked step or something of the nature. I wonder, Dennis, does that sound like something that we're talking about?
I think it could be like that, where you're essentially going to guide them in a sequential thing rather than trying to do things in parallel, which they can't do. They think they can, but they can't. Yeah. One more. Anybody else have a good example?
I think this is when, I'm sorry, Dennis, this is Kristen from Ball State. When I and my children, my family, when we were teaching and learning from home in the height of the pandemic, a lot of times I would be able to hear their Zooms going, and it would be my Zooms going, and my husband, who is a high school economics teacher, he would be teaching, and it was like, it was too much content, too much audio content.
Okay, I get it. Yeah. I think I'd be a little different, but it certainly was splitting your attention for sure. So I'll give an example. I think it happened even just yesterday while I'm in church and the pastor mentions a particular scripture or something, and then I go to look it up on my phone. When he has it up on the screen anyway, it would have been better to look up there than trying to scroll through on my phone to find the exact same thing. Like I was splitting my attention. Anyway, okay. Modality effect, a second effect. Our working memory, which is limited in capacity and duration, has separate processing areas. It's not like left brain, right brain, but different parts of my brain are used for things that I see than for things that I hear. So you've probably heard the term parallel computing and all. Well, we sort of have one in our head. So we need to sort of take advantage of the fact that I do have separate processing areas, that every one of my students has separate processing areas for things that they see and things that they hear. So to use the auditory mode to complement what they are seeing with different words than they actually see can help them process. However, if I were to, and actually I think I covered this a little bit later, I should not exactly read what's on the screen, because then I'm sort of splitting their attention between the two modes. They got their own conflict going on. Explaining complex things in audio while they see it in printed or on screen is a very good method. So this dual encoding, combination, words, visuals. And I think it's one of these things that, oh yeah, of course, like I didn't need a theory in order to understand that, maybe. So I do have an example, and it's going to take just a couple or few minutes to actually go through this, but I hope it's useful in the end. I'm going to show you a result of a survey that I do in my class, because this course that I'm pulling this from is about computing and generating good charts and things. So anyway, I'm going to show you the same thing 3 different ways. The first way is just graphic, the chart, the graphic. Not that it's graphic like horror film. No. It's just a graphic. And with static text, just like if it showed up on a piece of paper, this is what you'd get. Then I will go through the same thing, same visual, but with me explaining it verbally. And then I'll go through the same thing yet a third time with the graphic and just animated text, like we might do in an online environment where they could control the pace, etc., etc. So anyway, without further ado, and I hope I can get my pace approximately right here. First, you just look at it and read. Okay, so before I explain it, let me first make the comment. I'm not trying to do a pedagogical experiment here or anything. We didn't randomize which order you're doing the three. I'm just simply comparing three methods. Right? So don't infer too much from this little exercise. Here is a chart of the time between when students go home on the vertical axis and how far they live from home on the horizontal axis. Now the big balls mean, a larger ball means there are more, that represents more students. So in this case, there weren't too many students that lived a long way from home, and more students live closer. All right, so what happens here is, oops, I just shouldn't have done that, got ahead of myself. So you can sort of see that there is sort of an exponential rise. As students get farther and farther away from home, they sort of don't go home as often, like it's a longer term. Those students that live close to home go home pretty often. There's the chart. Okay, so now the third version with me being quiet, and I'll just do the animation, hopefully, and again at a decent pace for you. Okay, so that's that. Three different methods. One, completely static, you just read it. Second one, audio over the top of the visual. And then the third one, at least an approach to be sort of audio without audio, some animation that helps guide the person that's looking at this. So we'll come back to this in a little bit. Anyway, a brief discussion about modality. So you can mention whatever comes to your mind with regard to audio cues and visuals. Maybe for some of us, we'll confess, oh, shoot, yep, that's how I use my slide decks and I shouldn't do that. Maybe you could just, you have a new thought, how could you effectively complement your visuals and your commentary? And I put this little simple sort of equation-y looking thing here at the bottom. I'm continually reminding my students, actually, we get in conversation, someone will ask, well, could I get a copy of your presentation? And I usually scold them in this way. Well, no, I'd be glad to provide you my visuals, but the presentation is history and it wasn't recorded. So you can't have, because I can use the same visuals with a different audience and get a different commentary, and it's entirely a different presentation. So anyway, the presentation is the package of all three. So what are your thoughts? Any rapid discussion on modality, this audio with the video, visual, not necessarily video, but visual.
Hi, Mary Lou Versalotti. I'm at Ball State as well. I teach courses for teachers of English as a second language or a new language, and I stress that the visual should always enhance the meaning in case the learner doesn't get all of the words. And I like with everything with universal design, what works for students who need some extra support actually works with everyone. So thanks for this presentation.
Good. Got time for another one? Any other thoughts? Well, keep thinking. We'll come back to the end. We'll have some more discussion, okay? All right, so just a little bit more vocabulary. I covered the first three: working memory, long-term memory, schema. The last one is this automaticity. I guess that's a word, I don't know. Dealing with making things that are automatic. The one that I often use as an example is driving the vehicle that you usually drive. If you drive, like I know exactly where the transmission, the radio, the key, the cruise control, etc. for the truck that I usually drive. Actually, I'm pretty automatic in my wife's car because I drive it a lot too. I'm not quite as automatic in her car as I am in my truck. So anyway, I'm not using any of my working memory or very little of it to do those things in that vehicle. So ponder this term of automaticity with regard to your students. So I'm not really going to like give much presentation here, except just remind us of the word automatic. What is it that we would like our students to be automatic at or with? Now I just did a horrible thing with grammar there and ended with the preposition. Please forgive me. Edit that out, Molly. I'm just kidding. Consider your students. What is it that's already automatic for your students? And if it is automatic, well, then you don't need to spend time in your course dealing with that at all. They're automatic. But then also consider your objectives. At the end of your course, or at the end of a module, at the end of today's class, or whatever section you're talking about, what is it that you want to be automatic for them? And so you're going to design your managing of the cognitive load, considering what is already automatic and what I want to become automatic. So how about just ponder your syllabus? You don't need to pull it out and show it to us. But maybe you could speak to, in your, at least one or two of you, here is an objective for my course, and I want my students to be very quick with that. Like it'd be automatic. They'd be able to do it without using their working memory. What do you have?
I think in my course, sometimes some of the more automatic things might be some of the fundamental terms that we build upon for more deeper concepts.
Sure.
Throughout the semester. Without that foundation, then that retrieval process or that building might take a little bit longer.
Yes, and if they don't get automatic with that soon enough, then as you and the rest of the class moves on to the other things, you're sort of considering that to be automatic, like they knew what you meant by that. And if they're still Googling it and looking it up on the book or whatever, well, then they're soon going to get behind because they're not as automatic. Yeah. One more, anybody?
Yes, I'm Marguerite Benko from Ivy Tech and teach general chemistry. And so this mathematical sequencing called dimensional analysis, so they can just look at a problem and go through that scaffolding. If they can do that, they can pass this class. And that's what I tell them. So we practice on that.
Excellent. I am very glad you brought that up, Marguerite, because one of the speeches I give to our students who all have to take chemistry is that chemistry has value not only for the subject matter chemistry, chemicals and bonds, etc., but you will learn significant digits in chemistry, and you need to know that the rest of your life. You will learn this dimensional analysis, unit cancellation, that will serve you well for the rest of your life. So please take chemistry seriously and get automatic at that. Yeah, that's a great.
All right. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so let's go on. So another one of these effects that deal with managing the cognitive load is this thing called expertise reversal. Just let you read that for a second. When you know a lot about a topic, maybe some of you are on today and you've read about cognitive load before and you're thinking, boy, Dennis is really going slow. Like, let's just get to the point, maybe. But when you know a lot about the topic, if someone is elaborating and trying to help manage your cognitive load because they think you're a novice, actually it gets in the way. So one of the examples is worked examples, where if someone already knows how to work an example and you proceed to work yet another example, you're kind of getting in the way of them actually learning the next thing. Like, the whole point of this instruction is to help them build a schema to advance their level of understanding. Now, if you just want them to be more automatic and quicker, then repetition in working examples is it. But if you're just wanting to learn them to learn new content, another worked example probably isn't it. All right, so here's my example, because I would really like to have one of these. I've driven one, but I don't have one. How would you explain the operation of a specific track loader? I can't read the number on a particular model. It's a Caterpillar 9 something. Like, it has a certain set of controls. How would you explain, here's how you make this machine do all that it can do, to a teenager who maybe hasn't driven anything, or if they did drive anything, it was just a car with an automatic transmission? Like, think about, well, I guess maybe you haven't driven one of these either, but you can probably imagine that it's got a whole host of controls that are very different than a car. So you would explain all of that in a very different way than you would to someone who had a model that was similar to this, just wasn't this model, right? So you get a farmer or an excavating contractor that's driven an unbelievable number of vehicles that have key. If it has a key, they know how to drive it. Well, in that case, then all you'd really need to do on this particular model is point out, well, here's how this control is different than usual, or different than the one that you drove before. So you'd go about it very differently. Because if you started explaining left track, right track, curl, dump, automatic leveling of the loader, reverse goes faster than forward, like if you went into details of those things to someone that had experience, you're dealing with expertise reversal, and you know, if nothing else, you're going to cause frustration. So this expertise reversal concept or principle suggests that maybe you do a little bit of guidance fading. So in addition to that efficiency of, well, you've seen an example like this before, let me skip a step to get to the point, right? So those of us that do anything with regard to algebra or mathematics, we tend to start skipping more steps the further along the student progresses. Hopefully, even in language of all kinds, whether it's, you know, writing or just literature in general, hopefully at some point you can start to skip over some of the rudimentary things of grammar and sort of get to the more complicated things. Ponder expertise reversal. So I won't ask you to respond right now. We can come back to it at the end. Think of something you might cover early in the course. You repeatedly use it throughout the course, but every time you use it, you don't go through every single step of it, because at some point they start to become an expert and they're automatic with it. So you don't need to show every step. So worked examples would be one where you show step by step. You'd start replacing worked examples, replace practice exercises with worked examples so that they can actually see the way that you think, at least sometimes, but not too much. So this backwards fading, which I already just mentioned. Let me skip that part. All right, so redundancy effect. I'm looking at the time. What time are we done, Molly? We got officially like 1:30, right?
Correct.
We're a little early is always welcome. I get it. All right, so the redundancy effect, where you can read it. Okay, so we frequently apply this to information that's irrelevant to schema acquisition. For me to redundantly say again, what isn't needed for acquiring the current thing that you're teaching, well, in that case, it's redundant. Should not be confused with rehearsal or repetition, because you do need to practice and do it again to become more automatic. But it's not redundant. All right, so if I were to read the text on a slide, that is redundant. Like text or audio explanation for a visual that doesn't truly need any explanation. Okay, I was just redundant on purpose there, actually. It's why I try my best. And of course, none of us ever fully succeed in their efforts. When I have very much text on a slide, because I feel like, well, that is the most concise way to get it across, I'll just shut up for a few seconds so that people can read what's on the slide, because I don't need to be redundant with exactly what they're seeing. All right, so let's go back to the charts that I did 3 times. And now you know that chart of how often do students get home. When I said something about what the vertical axis is and what the horizontal axis is, well, we're all educated people. Even if you don't teach charts and things like that, you're all educated, you're teachers. You didn't need me to explain X and Y axis. So that was redundant. It got in the way of moving forward and just understanding the chart. But I did it on purpose so that you would feel a little bit of that, oh, come on, just get to the point of the chart. Okay, so I'm trying to help you know what it feels like to be a student who's experiencing redundant things. Now, if I say that one more time, I'm really super over redundant, so I have to move on. Okay, so we saw that one. If I said F equal MA, that's entirely redundant. If, however, I comment that force is mass times acceleration, well, to a student who has already seen force equals mass times acceleration multiple times, then I'm being redundant. If this is early in a student's experience with that particular equation, and I say force equal mass times acceleration, then I'm actually not being redundant, because I'm actually explaining the visual that they see. Because isn't it true that F could be something other than force? M could be anything other than mass. A could be not acceleration. But in this context, I'm talking about forces mass times acceleration. By the way, for those of us that teach anything regarding algebra and equations, my encouragement to you is never, even with experienced students, don't say F equal MA. That is the shorthand. It's what we write in the cryptic mode, but what we're really saying is the whole sentence. So we should say the whole sentence. All right, so I have an example. Yes, you don't want to read what's on the slide, but if it is explained or you're elaborating on it, that's a whole different story. So here's an example. If I stopped at slope is rise over run, and this is a student that ever had high school geometry and algebra, well then that was redundant. They should know this. But if I add just a little bit, if X was time and Y was weight, then isn't it true that rise over run would be weight over time? And so the slope of that would be the rate of change of weight over time. That's like growth rate of a chicken or a pig or a plant. If X was time and Y was distance, then rise over run is distance over time. The slope of that is the velocity or the speed of the car, the runner, the cheetah, or whatever it is that's running. So I want you to remember that, yes, slope is rise over run, but those things always have units. And so slope indeed also has units. So the units must go with the number, or the number doesn't have full meaning. So That's my quick example of elaborating a little bit, helps bring to light and explain the simple thing that they might be looking at. All right, so learner control. Let's think about, at least in your mind, and then when we close for discussion, we can come back to it. What are the benefits of giving the learner control of the pacing and the content? Just ponder that just for a minute. And it does relate to managing their cognitive load. Because if their cognitive load, their working memory is taxed, and this is to the individual student. If an individual student has their working memory is like severely loaded at the moment, they're going to need to decrease the pace to grab it. And allowing them to control that pace is important. And then to control the content that they're seeing. All right, so there's very little control in lecture. There's a little bit of control of pacing and content in textbooks. It takes a lot of thought, as Frank mentioned a little earlier, with regard to web or CD content. So how do we help with learner control? We teach in segments and modules, bite-sized pieces, if you will, morsels that allow them to repeat the pieces that are necessary for them to repeat. If they see a module, well, I know how to do a data table in Excel. I don't need to watch the video about that. I know how to use the spell checker. I don't need any instruction about that. Well, then they would skip it. So teach in segments or modules. And then we would teach the support knowledge separately. And then this is, I don't have time to go into it too much today, but this notion of teaching the components before the full enchilada, if you will, where you build up the pieces so that they have the schema for how things fit together before you actually give them the whole of the problem, the whole of the assignment. It's sort of backwards with regard to motivation, because then they might not find it motivating to learn certain approaches or techniques, but they'll be much more skilled and it will be more efficient to teach the components before the full deal. Okay, so this is the slide I'm going to come back to. Well, let's just leave it there. So look, here we go. We've got fully 15 minutes or so. I do have one more slide to show you, but it's just the resource. So let's just, I guess I'll leave that up and try to fix my view on my other screen. I don't know if I can. But I'd say let's just unmute and have some chatter. Yes, you can chat or just unmute and conversation about anything on that slide or anything else that's relevant to the topic today.
Dennis, real quick on the last slide, you said to teach support knowledge separately. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit? What you mean by support knowledge?
Sure. In my case, in the computing class, and we do, people have assorted views about spreadsheets, but we do quite phenomenal programming in spreadsheets in my course. And so I would consider one of the support knowledge pieces would be the building blocks of naming variables, using this thing that I call a 5-column format, using a data table. It's not a table of data, it's actually a special Excel feature. So data table, the likes of data validation or forms. Like I must teach those as individual pieces, and then they would master each piece and then do the bigger. Actually, that's a little bit of the components part, but the support knowledge really is, if I had a student that was weak in algebra and I'm trying to get them to mathematically model things, then I'm going to have to find them a module on algebra for them to sort of brush up. But I don't need to bring the whole class through that. I just need a module that I can point students to. Sorry, I spoke to the last one more than the support knowledge. But I would say in the case, another example of the support knowledge separately would be, when I grade the things that they write, I'm assuming that they know how to use grammar correctly. And so I'm not going to teach grammar in the course that I'm teaching. But if I see that they're struggling with it, well, then I'll go find a resource that can help them with their grammar. That's sort of the support knowledge to the writing of the in the technical field.
Thank you.
Yep. What's on your mind? Collectively, all of you, oops, sorry, I keep things wrong. Collectively, all of you have way more experience than I do. So let's make this a dialogue. It's probably easy to see I'm doing a bad job of managing your cognitive load. I should have given you one of these at a time. You're looking at the whole screen and say, I can't think of that. No, pick one bullet item and stay on that one bullet item. That would be the best way.
This is Dagny at Ball State. I'll go. One issue I have, I teach an upper level economics course, and there's a prerequisite of principles of microeconomics for the course. It's a course in urban economics. And so I have some students that have only had one economics course previously, which is the prerequisite, and then other students that have had like 4 or 5 economics courses. So there's quite a divergence in the skill level and knowledge of economics. So when you were talking about learner control, that would be applicable to my issue, because the students that have only had one course, they tend not to be really strong in like the supply and demand model, which is the basis for the whole course. So this has given me some ideas for so I have everybody kind of go back through the basics of supply and demand and work through some problems and that sort of thing. That's the first homework set. But this has helped me, especially with the technology that we have now, that I can just set up a module so that the students that aren't as well versed in that model can do some extra work to get up to speed, and then the other students we can just progress. So thank you. This has been helpful.
Could give Dagny the baton and she has to pass it on to someone of her choosing, maybe. I think an easy one. Think of the second bullet on the right. A skill or a knowledge that you have, and let's keep it maybe in your discipline, in the field that you teach. What's a skill or knowledge that you have that's automated, that maybe your students don't have automated, but you'd like them to get there? How about a couple of those?
Hi, this is Allison Babbage. I'm a chemistry faculty at Ivy Tech as well. Something that I see a lot in my second semester Gen Chem class that I have automated is being able to look at a compound and determine how it dissolves in water, whether it's ionic or covalent, so whether it breaks apart or doesn't break apart, and then pick out the spectator ions and don't do anything in the reaction. We use it in lab all the time, and my students are not automatic at doing that.
So they need some practice. Yeah.
Yes.
For me, it's syntactic categories, also known as parts of speech. I teach courses in linguistics, and when we're analyzing any sentence, I can go through very quickly and say, this is a determiner, this is a noun, this is a verb, this is an auxiliary. And I realized that my students need more time to think that through when I can just fly right through it word by word. And sometimes I forget to say, okay, why? And I realize how long I need to pause. And sometimes only one student can shout out the answer. So it's something I have to slow down.
I think for me, when we're reviewing videotapes of motor performance, as an expert, I can see a lot more information about the students' movements than the folks in class can see. So
I like one of the things that Mary Lou just mentioned there about what's automatic for her is not for the students. Sometimes we need to slow down and explain more so, which is helping them then construct the right schema for these things to become a little bit more automated. I know it's one of my, I don't know what the adjective here is, one of my blank weaknesses. Strong weakness, that's like an oxymoron. One of my weaknesses that is poor is going too fast when I think they should have this by now, but they don't have this by now. And I need to slow down and use different words, give a different example. But I'm thinking in my mind, but I've already done that 4 times. Why don't you have it? Shame on me. Just a couple more minutes. Anybody got something else come to mind? Have you ever experienced expertise reversal? Somebody talking to you about things? Yep, go ahead, Grace.
All right, yeah. So yeah, this is Grace from Indiana State University. And well, what I observed in my class is some students, especially the students who are very enthusiastic in learning, they tend to take a road while taking a lecture, while they are listening to lecture. But you mentioned that it is one example to split the attention. So do we need to encourage them to keep writing or to have them to pay attention in the lecture right during the class time? What do you think? What is your comment?
I think it very much depends. But there are definitely instances in my class where I tell them, ignore the fact that if it's in lab, ignore the fact that you're sitting at a computer, or put your pencils down, sit on your hands if you have to. I want you to listen to the next thing that I'm going to say. I want you to watch this demonstration because you're going to miss it if you don't focus here now. Like occasionally I will do something dramatic like that. Like in general, well, maybe they do need to write down some notes and not forget. I do, well, probably you all do now. We record because of COVID, etc. Now, in my case, I don't make it available to students unless they tell me I can't be, I'm not feeling well, or I can't be in class. Can I have access to the recording? I always record it, but I don't just give it out willy-nilly because I want them to actually come to my class. I want to see them. So they gotta bend over backwards to get the recording, but I will have it available. You know, if someone says, I want to see that again, I will give it at a moment's notice. And by nature of the things that I do, there aren't really handouts to give them either. It's like, that is the demo. You saw it live, or we talked about it, discussed it, or whatever. So I think in general, they should, it depends on the course, of course. Sometimes, yes, they need to take notes, but often they think they need to take notes, but they're better off just listening. Okay, well, let me show my last slide and then I can come back to this one until we all sign off. As Molly didn't say that we had to stay until 1:30. But I want to share this, and maybe you could just take a screen capture or photo of it. And if you miss it, just send me an email note. Of course, I'm easy to find. We're all easy to find. We're on the internet. But I was fortunate enough to get an award from the Purdue College of Ag a couple years ago. And I gave a lecture, and part of that did include, this lecture was influences of pedagogy on how I teach. A lot of it was on the cognitive load piece, but the other one that I focused on, which we're not talking about today, is this transparency in learning and teaching project, which I am very much a fan of this. Actually, Marianne Wilkemus, who led this, was at an Indiana LEAP thing that we had pre-COVID down in Indianapolis. This, I think, is a wonderful project that can help us all teach better. So anyway, there is a link to a YouTube video. You can put it on fast forward and watch it fast. And here's a link to the Tilt Higher Ed link. And if you missed it, just send me a note. I'll get these to you. So anyway, I'll turn it back to Molly. I'll leave that slide up just for another minute or two in case it sparks conversation. But thanks for being a good audience and engaging on occasion here. Molly, back to you.
Thank you so much. Let's all go down to our reactions button and let's give Dennis a virtual round of applause for his work here today. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And I want to encourage you to look at the Indiana, leapindiana.org website. Eventually, you got to give us a couple weeks end of the semester, but we will have this recording up on the website. And when you go to that website, you're also going to see that there are several teaching awards that Leap Indiana offers. I would encourage you to check those out. Maybe you want to apply for one of them yourself, or maybe you want to encourage one of your fantastic colleagues to submit a nomination for those awards that Leap Indiana offers. So anyone else need to make any announcements before we sign off for today? I'm looking at Rachel, who is my helper here. We co-chair this committee.
I just stand alongside Molly. She does all the work. I have nothing, Molly. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. We know that this is a crazy time of the semester, but I always like to just pause for a minute and see what something new that we can pull out. And so Dennis has provided that for us today. So thank you very kindly, Dennis. And also, if you have some tidbits of information that you would like to share in a future fourth Monday coffee hour for Leap Indiana, please go to the website and make a submission for something that you'd like to contribute to the dialogue. And we'll see if we can't get you scheduled going forward. So have a great rest of the semester. Good luck in finishing up strong, and we will see you in the future. Goodbye.